In this section, we are going to do a demo for e-commerce application with implementation of microservice architectures. As you know that we have designed our architecture with applying microservice architecture pattern and principles. Now it is time to make a code review for the e-commerce application which is implemented on microservice architecture in .NET ecosystem. So we will introduce and explain a GitHub repository which including the microservices .NET platforms and implementation of microservices using ASP.NET, Docker, RabbitMQ, Mesh Transit, gRPC, Ocelot, MongoDB, Redis, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, Dapper, Anti-Framework Core, CQRS and clean architecture technologies and pattern and principles. And also it is included cross-cutting concerns like implementation, centralized distributed logging with Elasticsearch, Kibana, Serilog, and use the health checks with Watchdog, implementing retry and circuit breaker pattern that we learned in the previous section. So if you go ahead the implementation of the microservice architecture, you can see the picture on the slide. This is the microservice web application user interface. This is the traditional e-commerce application. So we are going to clone the microservice repository from the GitHub, and you can run the docker compose up command to see and reach these web UI representation with the other microservices and all integrations. So basically we will see the microservices on .NET environment, and these will be used Docker for containerized and orchestration. And for microservice communication, we will see that gRPC and asynchronous communication with RabbitMQ. For API gateway, we will see Ocelot API gateway, and using the different database platforms, for example NoSQL and relational databases. And also we will see how CQRS and clean architecture pattern and principles implement for this repository. So let's look at the big picture of the implementation of the e-commerce application in .NET environment. So basically there is a couple of microservices which implement an e-commerce application modules, which are the catalog, basket, discount and ordering microservices. We all see during the course these microservices, and all these microservices are using different database technologies, NoSQL and relational databases. For example, MongoDB, Redis, and these are the NoSQL databases, and PostgreSQL, SQL Server, these are the relational database using from the microservices. And also these microservices communicating over the gRPC and also using asynchronous communication with RabbitMQ event bus for the event driven communication, and using the Ocelot API gateway for the performing API gateway operations. So now let me explain one-to-one for every microservice and component. This is the first point, which is the catalog microservices. This is developed by the ASP.NET Core Web API function and implementing and exposing REST APIs for the CRUD operations, and using the MongoDB NoSQL database, and this is the document database for the catalog operations, and implementation of the nLayer architecture, and exposing the Swagger OpenAPI implementation, and it has Docker file and able to compose with the Docker compose file. And the second microservice is basket microservices. Again, this is the ASP.NET Core Web API implementation, exposing APIs using the REST API and CRUD operations, and using the Redis database for NoSQL key value database, storing the shopping cart items in here. And also it is consume and integrate with the discount gRPC service using the gRPC protocol for inter-service synchronous communication to calculate the final product price. And after that, basket microservices publish basket checkout queue event to the RabbitMQ with using Mesh Transit, and this will be triggered the asynchronous communication that can be consumed and subscribed from the ordering microservices. And if you go ahead, here you can see the discount microservices. This is ASP.NET gRPC server application for building a high performant inter-service communication. This is going to expose gRPC endpoints with protofiles, and this will be consumed from the basket microservices. And also we can use Dapper for micro ORM implementation in here to integrate with the PostgreSQL with performant way. And discount gRPC microservice is using relational PostgreSQL database. And lastly, we have ordering microservices. Ordering microservices is again ASP.NET Web API, and this microservice implementing domain driven design, CQRS and clean architecture pattern and principles in this code. So we will examine these, how to developing CQRS using the Mediator, Fluent Validation and Automapper NuGet libraries. And basically these ordinary microservices consume RabbitMQ basket checkout event queue with using the mass transit and RabbitMQ configurations, and as a database using relational SQL Server database and using anti-framework core for the ORM and auto migrate for the SQL Server. And this is the ordering microservices that we are going to examine and code review in the next video. So basically the communication is held by the RESTful and gRPC communication and also asynchronous communication with publish subscribe pattern using the RabbitMQ topic exchange model. And we will use mass transit for the abstraction over the RabbitMQ message broker into microservice libraries, and basically publishing the basket checkout event from the basket microservices, and this will be subscribing from the ordering microservices and start the order fulfillment process into their architecture. So here you can see the API gateway. For the API gateway in .NET ecosystem, it is using Ocelot microservices, and in the Ocelot library we can basically writing the sample microservice and containers to routing through the downstream microservices, and it is basically run multiple different API gateways and applying backend for front-end APIs. And also here you can see the additional microservices under the API gateway box. This is the aggregator microservice which implementing the service aggregator pattern for shopping aggregator operations. So this is an implementation of that pattern. And also we have web application for the client operations. This is our web UI shopping application that we saw in the last slide. This is traditional e-commerce web page that call and invoke from the API gateway to reach the downstream microservices, and it is calling the Ocelot API gateway with the HTTP client factory and using the poly, and this is the ASP.NET Core Razor application into the client applications. Also in this GitHub repository we will see microservice cross-cutting concerns, which are the microservice resilience, health checks, and also observability pattern and principles. For example, it is implementing centralized distributed logging with using the Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Every microservices writing logs into the Elasticsearch, and also it is using the health checks feature in the backend ASP.NET microservices to understand the web status of the each microservices, and using watchdog in a separate service that can watch the health and load across the services and report the health about the microservices by querying with the health checks. And additionally, microservice resiliency implementation, in here we basically using and implementing retry and circuit breaker pattern, and also exponential backoff pattern with using the poly library. Poly is provided to implement resiliency patterns into our microservices and communications, and all these infrastructure of the application are hosting on the Docker. So every microservices and database is containerized with the Docker, and we use Docker containers and Docker image from the Docker app for the database and RabbitMQ, and we can run the whole system with running the Docker compose up command. That's why we will see Docker compose files and how to bootstrap these applications using the Docker compose files in the next video.